Good evening, viewers. Let me take this opportunity to firstly wish all of you a happy and prosperous and productive new year. Those of you home here in Guyana, those who tune in from abroad within the diaspora, those who are, I would consider, ardent followers of my writings and public programs like this. So happy new year to you and welcome to this first episode of my take with you here on the Guyanese Critic platform, or TBN. As you would have seen in the promo earlier today, tonight I would like to speak to you about two topics, particularly the Natural Resources Fund and the cost of living measures that the government would have implemented, more so the impact of the cost of living measures. Now, over the past few weeks, the President, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, would have made some announcements, and as part of his end of year remarks with the media, and he indicated in one of those forums that we can expect, the country could expect, the people could expect additional cost of living tailored measures in budget 2024. On my way coming here, the ministry just put out a notice stating that budget day is scheduled for January the 15th. So with that in mind, that we can expect additional measures in budget 2024 to help to confront cost of living in Guyana. That aside, cost of living in Guyana remains an active daily debate in our society. It's a daily debate in the media and many different quarters, many different segments. My objective, therefore, is not to say that certain segments of the population are not experiencing any sort of difficulty. Of course, we have vulnerable groups of people who are experiencing difficulties. But what we have to appreciate and understand is that whether the policies implemented by the government of the day and whether the investments, short, medium, and long-term investments, allocation of resources, etc., are achieving that objective of alleviating poverty, closing the income gap, and enabling our people to uplift themselves, to elevate themselves. And that is the context within which I want to discuss the impact of the cost of living measures that would have been implemented starting from budget 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Now, what is that impact? Based on some analysis that I've done recently. And we have seen, of course, we can't ignore the alternative. And the alternative, I'm referring here to the political opposition. When you listen to their presentation and their attempt to articulate policies, it is only geared towards one aspect rather than a broader framework of whether we want to say a broader framework of a strategy, a development strategy for the country, a broader framework of policies, none of that is evident. So let's go right into the numbers. The impact, both direct and indirect impact, of all the measures implemented, and we'll go through each measure in a moment, would have effectively translated to indirectly annually $1.4 million per household, or $117,000 monthly per household. That's the effect. That's the ultimate effect of these measures. Now, what are these measures and what am I talking about? How did I arrive at this number? Now, you would hear the alternatives say, well, there is enough money in the Natural Resource Fund to pay each household, to transfer to each household $300,000 per month, and all sorts of proposals of such, without thinking it through, running the numbers, doing the math, and see whether it's sustainable or not. But we'll come to that in a moment. How did I arrive at this figure? Let's look at the first set of measures from the 2020 budget. Now, in the 2020 budget, which was the first budget of the incumbent government, they would have immediately reversed a plethora of tax measures, VAT, and fees. And you could go now on the Attorney General website and download the gazetted, the approved budget for that year. You would see these measures. They have to be gazetted after the budget is approved, and you would see a long list of items. Now, I've seen the opposition. Some of the opposition members have often questioned where is this 200 taxes? Well, the 200 taxes, I'll explain to you how it is 200 taxes. They had reduced the VAT from 16%. Now, you would recall, or some of you may not know this, when VAT was first implemented in the pre-2015 era, it was implemented at a rate of 16%, but it replaced completely a 30% excise tax. And then, so it replaced a 30% excise tax. The rate was 16%. And there were a long list of items, food items specifically, that some were zero rated. And that is how, when they came into office in 2015, they took a lot of those zero rated items that were hundreds of zero rated items that never attracted VAT before, and add VAT onto them. For example, VAT on electricity, VAT on water, VAT on private education, VAT on private health care. You know, all these items, health care, education, and food, consumables that never attracted VAT. That is how we get the 200, largely how we arrive at 200. Hundreds of items that never attracted VAT, they add VAT onto. Then the increase in taxes, increase in fees, and so on. What did that amount to? It amounted to over $60 billion in additional tax revenues to the Treasury. That means it is $60 billion from your pockets, from the pockets of household, that is collected in tax revenue, effectively reducing eroding your disposable income. So the first budget immediately reversed those measures. So immediately it restored $60 billion in disposable income by that single measure, which affected hundreds of items. Then you would recall that we had the Russia-Ukraine war resulted in rising fuel prices. Our fuel import bill increased dramatically from 500 million US to now nearly $1 billion US. So it has doubled. The excise tax on fuel imports was 50%. That was reduced down to 0%. What did that result? That effectively resulted in foregoing of nearly $20 to $30 billion annually in revenue. Now, this is not money coming to your pockets. It's not a direct transfer through increase in wages or some other form or a grant or so. But fuel or energy, we use it to fuel every aspect of our life. It affects every aspect of life, whether it is whether you're in a commercial sense, in an industrial sense, if you have a manufacturing or you have mining, and at the household level. Almost every household, most households have a vehicle. You need fuel at the pump station. So you're not paying more at the pump station for that. Every aspect of life that affects. Then then electricity. The generation cost, fuel cost accounts for a large part of electricity generation cost. You could go and independently verify this because you could go on GPL website now as I speak, and their financial statements are publicly available, and you could go and verify what is the cost of generation. That's largely the fuel import for GPL to generate electricity for the country. It's a massive amount. So when the fuel prices went up, obviously the generating cost increased dramatically, but that cost was not transferred to the consumer. That meant the government absorbed that cost. So effectively, we're getting subsidized electricity because electricity, the rates did not increase. We may be consuming more energy because of installing more appliances in our homes, but the cost per unit has not increased. And that amounted to another $17 to $20 billion annually additionally. That's effectively subsidizing electricity cost. So when the economic advisor because these guys don't understand the concept of policy making, economic policy making in a practical sense. They're only thinking of policy making as a way of everything you dip into the treasury and you make a direct payout of cash. Policy making in a practical, real sense, economic policy making, are not conducted in that way, in that manner. Because if you go and you check the record, you would see they have been calling for the government should subsidize fuel for the taxi drivers. The government should subsidize electricity for the vulnerable, and they're putting it in groups, not the entire country. Taxi hire car owners, taxi drivers, or taxi operators, minibus operators, because that's the transportation public transportation sector, and subsidize electricity for the vulnerable, failing to realize that the government has actually subsidized electricity for the entire country. They have subsidized fuel at the pump station for all and sundry, not only hire car and minibus. But they don't understand that concept. And that is how they, because of their lack of understanding of basic concepts and how policy making is conducted, they mislead an entire country. Arguably so, and I would say evidently so. So that's how many measures I went through. Excise tax, GPL. What about your water rates, your water bill? GWI also incur higher cost for fuel. That as well was subsidized. That's about another $4 billion. Then there was the $5 billion provision through the budget. And here I have to pause to say that when the opposition talks about, particularly the economic advisor, who is an intern, by the way, he says that the government only provides $5 billion, less than 1% of the budget for cost of living measures. Totally not true. Totally false. But he doesn't understand. He's not a real economist. He doesn't understand these things. So I can't be too harsh on him, as I'm going through all the measures here, and it's far more than $5 billion. But they're only looking at what is in the budget. What I'm talking about here, these are policy measures that has that effect. Reducing a tax from 50 to 0 is giving up $20 billion in revenue. Not increasing electricity rates is costing the power company and would have to be subsidized as well from the treasury for the increased cost in electricity. Same for GWI, plus the $5 billion. The part-time jobs, which I think it's about 10 or 15,000 people now, persons countrywide, that was meant strictly, it is not meant to be a permanent job for people. It is part of the measures, the broad measures of the government to cushion the impact of rising cost of living. And so persons have been benefiting from this cost the treasury about $5 to $10 billion annually. That is money to supplement household income. And then eventually these persons, they get a scholarship, they move on, they study, they get a better job, they get a permanent job. So that is what this was meant for, strictly. Then you have the education subventions, another $15 billion annually. The freight charges, you don't see this in your pocket. But during the pandemic, as a resulting from the pandemic, the cost of shipping went up exponentially by 300%. And if we had to incur that cost which would have been translated right onto the final product on the shelves in the supermarket, we would not have been able to maybe survive that. And so to counter that, to cushion that, the government used the pre-pandemic rate, which is not the 300% or 400%, 500% in some cases increase. They use the old rate to calculate the SIF, and so that is another measure which resulted in foregoing or giving up of another maybe $6 to $12 billion in revenue. Then you have the public assistance program, another $1 billion. You have the increase, have the social welfare program, increase in old age pension, another 365 million, increase in public sector wages and salaries, which for the 3 years cumulatively is about $33 billion, or on average $11 billion a year. That's the cost of the annual increases. And you have subsidies for first-time home owners. I didn't mention the increase in tax threshold and all these other, there are several other measures. These are the main ones that I have identified that amount to nearly $190 billion a year. So it is not the $5 billion alone in the budget. These policies that I've just gone through, the impact of it is, whether it is in foregone revenue, giving up revenue to the Treasury, or a cost to the Treasury coming out through the budget, it amounts to nearly $190 billion a year. Now, if we translate that to a household level, that's how we get the $1.4 million annually. Now, how do we interpret that? Another one I did not mention is, you look at low-income housing the low-income housing program. There is a mortgage interest relief program. All these are policies, these are initiatives that were pioneered and implemented under the incumbent government, not only in this term, but in their previous term in government. And so you take into account those persons who have a low income mortgage, who are paying their taxes, they're a first-time homeowner, and they're eligible for the mortgage interest relief. How that works, at the end of the year, when you file your tax return, you are eligible for you get back the interest paid on the loan. And based on the low income ceiling, which is between 8 to 20 million, that interest annually could be in the region of $250 to $625,000 a year. Now that's a lot of money for a low income family. So all these are measures, through policies, through economic policies, carefully crafted policies, which is equated to about $1.4 million a year. Now, what that means effectively is that if the government did not make these interventions, as I've just gone through in some detail, it means that the average household would have had to incur at least another $120,000 a month, or $1.4 million a year, to cover their household expenses and to sustain their daily livelihoods. That is what it means. And so this is what I wanted to explain to you. Now let's look at the global perspective. The global perspective, I've looked at the inflation rate as at 2022 for maybe the top 10 countries with the highest inflation rates. These inflation rates for countries like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Lebanon, Argentina, Turkey, Suriname, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Ghana, Angola, these interest rates range between 300% rather, as of 2022, 300%, all the way down to 10%. That's the lowest in this range. 10 to 300%. The estimated inflation for this year for these countries ranged from 109 down from 300 to 193%. To the country with 10% is forecasted upwards 19%. The global average inflation rate for 2022 was 8.7%. For 2023 it's estimated to slow at 5.3%, the global average. Our inflation rate has abated to below the global average. So from the global perspective, given that I've established many times in my writings and right here in this program that what triggered this rising cost of living period that we're in, it is not only unique to Ghana, but it is a global issue that was triggered following the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and then compounded by the Russia-Ukraine war. And this is where we are today. So it is, in our case, we're declining, and that is not the outcome of non-intervention by the government or the government not doing anything about it. It is as a result of direct intervention, deliberate policies, and an allocation of resources, and the manner in which the economy is managed to achieve that outcome. Before I conclude on this topic of the cost of living measures, the impact that is, if we are to look at only just two indicators in the banking sector, to indicators that signal whether there is an increase in disposable income at the aggregate level, what would those indicators be? You would want to look at the total deposits in the banking sector for individuals, and you want to look at the real estate mortgages in the banking sector and the level of growth and the movement in those two indicators. And what did I find? What I found was, let's take individual customers' total deposits. Individual customers' total deposits as at 2014 total $117 billion. The last figures as at September 2023, individual deposits has gone up to $355 billion. That's an increase of about 80% or $158 billion. The real estate mortgages, same thing. Real estate mortgages increased at a similar rate. Now let me translate this differently using percentages for you. If we look to get a proper perspective, I have looked at the average annual growth of individual deposits for the period 2016 to 2019 and compare that to the period 2020 to 2023. And the result is individual customer deposits grew on average annually for the first period 2016 to 2019 by 6%. And for 2020-23, it grew by 10%. Real estate loans grew by 5% annually on average for the period 2016 to 2019. And 2020 to 23, obviously because of the aggressive housing development drive by the government, the average annual growth is 8%. That translates to for the 2016-2019 period to 42 billion and 12 billion respectively. And in the case of 2020-2023, 98 billion and 26 billion. So it has the level of growth or the rate of growth. Let me simplify all these numbers for you. The simple interpretation is what these numbers mean that I've just gone through. The level of growth in looking at these two indicators for these two periods in individual customer deposits in the banking sector and real estate loans have grown twice the rate of the preceding period, or 2 times the rate, more than 2 times actually, the rate of growth for the preceding period. Now that tells you of what is happening. That tells you of the outcome of the policies and intervention in the economy, not only cost of living measures, but generally what is taking place in the economy across all sectors: construction, mining, agriculture. The services industry is exploding, and that is attributable largely to an effective and strong local content legislation, specifically for the oil and gas sector, to build out the oil and gas value chain and all the other sectors. So that is where we are for the period 2020, 2023. Now we're looking forward to the 2024 budget, and of course I will have a dedicated program to look at that when post-budget 2024, when it is presented in the National Assembly. So I'm halfway through the program tonight, and the second topic I want to now address is all right. Now, over the past few weeks, Chartered Accountant Lal Bachchan Christopher Ram would have, through his Stabrook News column, would have written several pieces which were repackaged in the form of substantive stories in the Stabrook News and the Kaicho News, and which he sought to amplify on a radio program. And in those columns, he made several, I would say, egregious allegations, egregious, reckless, careless commentaries with regard to certain matters in the petroleum industry, specifically the Petroleum Agreement 2016 that governs the Stabrook Block operations. I want to now take in this final segment of tonight's program, the second half of tonight's program, to address as much as possible some of these issues or contentions of Christopher Ram, which I challenged. If those of you who follow me religiously, you would have noted my responses that appeared in the print media. The recent one that I want to address, the most recent one that I want to address is where he said, he made this outlandish remark or claim that the balance in the Natural Resources Fund is overstated by $274 billion. And he is relying on he has isolated a subsection from in the petroleum agreement to base that assertion. Well, I term it an aspersion, not an assertion, because it is not grounded in any fact, it is not grounded in any reason or logic or proper analysis on his part. And he's saying that pursuant to Article 15 in the Petroleum Agreement 2016, now these are documents, these agreements are publicly available. You don't have to take it from him, you don't have to take it from me. You, the viewers, the people of this country, everybody have access to a device, a mobile device. Everybody have access to the internet. And you can go and independently verify these claims. Now, you don't have to take, when these guys speak, what they say is not gospel. Article 15 in the Petroleum Agreement has several sub-clauses. So what I mean by that, there is 15.1, 15.2, 15.3, 15.4, 15.5. All of that make up Article 15. One provision or one article in the agreement, but broken into several 15.1, 15.2, 15.3. Now he is only basing his aspersion on a single subsection out of the entire Article 15, which states that the minister has to provide the GRA, the minister has to pay ExxonMobil taxes on their behalf. And the GRA has to issue a tax certificate to the oil companies. Now, first, let me give you some quick background. This particular clause that he's relying on, it is a contentious matter. Well, I should say it was a contentious matter. I have criticized it. The government criticized it. Many people criticized it. But I've come here many times, and I've written many times extensively in relation to the decision of the government. I don't want to go through this, which is the justification for not renegotiating the 2016 agreement. The 2016 agreement is what we're working with. We've accepted it. Government has made a decision that there are many considerations, there are many ramifications, and I've gone through them extensively here. So we have to abide by and adhere to the 2016 agreement. Now, that, what I would say, which was a contentious subsection of Article 15 in the agreement, you have to read it together with Article 15.1, which states effectively that the oil companies are exempted from paying taxes. They're exempted from paying corporate taxes, they're exempted from paying VAT, excise taxes, duties, etc. So effectively, they're not paying any taxes. They're exempted from the corporate taxes, because what we're getting in the form of economic rent, if we want to call it that, in accordance with the 2016 agreement, the fiscal terms and conditions, we've waived taxes, but we're getting We've accepted through that agreement the 50% royalty and the 2%. Sorry, the 2% royalty and the 50% profit oil. So that is what we're getting, the government is getting to the treasury. So I describe this whole argument put forward by Christopher Ram as a storm in a teacup. It is an inconsequential issue because it is not that the government has a liability to honor. So let me simplify this as best as I could. The GRA administers the tax laws of the country. The tax laws apply to companies, corporations, and individuals. Taxes is the primary form of income or revenue to the state, for the government. So he is saying that this money in the Natural Resource Fund, which represents the taxes paid on behalf of Exxon, which they're exempted from, has to be transferred to the consolidated fund. Now, in my response to him, I pointed to, he's referring to the consolidated fund, but he's ignored totally and completely that the consolidated fund is governed by the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act is the principal act in respect of public finances, the receipt of public, that governs the receipt of public finances, that provides the regulation for public finances, that provides for the expenditure, the appropriation, the management, and accounting, the accounting rules for public finances. In accordance with the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, the principal act, it provides that public monies can be held in one of three places. One, can be held in the consolidated fund. Two, it can be held in a deposit fund. Three, it can be held in an extra budgetary fund. If you go on to read the Act, Section 37 of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, to be specific, to point you to a specific section in the Act, it goes on to outline or prescribe rather what constitutes an extra budgetary fund and how an extra budgetary fund is to be created. And the Act says an extra budgetary fund may be created by an act meaning a law or a legislation. So when you read that section in the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, you would quickly recognize that the Natural Resources Fund is essentially an extra budgetary fund because it was established by way of the Natural Resources Fund Act, and the Natural Resources Fund Act enables the institutionalization of the fund, the governance structure of the fund, and the management and operations of the fund. It has a board of directors, it has an investment committee, the operational management responsibility is vested with the Bank of Guyana, and withdrawals from the fund, the withdrawal rules from the fund is a prescribed rule that has to be adhered to strictly by the government or the finance minister. And withdrawals from the fund has to be pre-approved through the budget process before it could be actually withdrawn and then transferred to the consolidated fund. So with all of this, this contention or this aspersion by Christopher Arm that there is this grave error committed by the government, he has failed to establish whether there was a violation of any of the financial laws. He has failed to establish whether there is a breach or a misappropriation. There is no breach, there is no violation of any law. In fact, he has ignored totally the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. So I wanted to point that out clearly tonight in response to this gentleman, which is very disappointing because this is an individual who has been providing budget analysis for the past 2 decades. And if he is not, the fact that he has ignored completely the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, it tells me evidently that he's profoundly unfamiliar with public accounting and public financial management and the rules that govern it, which is enshrined in the law. And it tells me that Christopher Arm and the likes of him, they look at these issues from a very narrow lens, from a very narrow, ill-informed lens. And what is he accustomed to? He is accustomed to regular bookkeeping type of accounting for sole traders. He's accustomed to private sector accounting and auditing. Public sector accounting, even though the principles and the fundamentals are generally the same, but the policies and rules for public sector accounting versus private sector accounting very different. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that in public financial management and public accounting, the rules and policies that govern those are enshrined in the law, in the financial laws. Here, in this case, the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Private sector accounting, the rules and policies are not enshrined in the law. Sometimes they don't even adhere to the law. They establish rules rather and establish reporting requirements. And that's a different matter altogether for another day. So with that, so I'm told we have some more time. We have another 10 minutes. So let me take a minute to see if you have any commentary, any questions in the commentary that you'd like me to deal with. I don't see any. All right. So I see somebody said in the commentary, they're struggling to understand. Well, that is why I just simplified everything at the end. But I'll summarize the two main topics I addressed tonight. I'll summarize it. But I want to address one final thing since the time appears to be on my side tonight. I want to address another allegation of the same gentleman in one of his columns. The other allegation that he made was that, and these things are, I don't know how he could say these things. I don't know. And he's a chartered accountant and a trained attorney, you know. He wrote in one of his columns that, which made headline news in Starbuck News and Kaito News, that the government, two things I want to deal with. The government has ceded legislative sovereignty to ExxonMobil by virtue of the same 2016 petroleum agreement. And so that's one. And the other is that he's saying that because of the lack of ring fencing, this whole big ring fencing argument again, because of the lack of ring fencing, if there was ring fencing, the money that we should have been gaining, if there was in ring fencing, he has equated that or interpreted that as equity. You would recall at one of the vice president's press conference a few weeks ago, a Kaito News reporter asked him this question, and this question was, they were referring to Christopher Ram's story which they carried, whether it is true the government is a de facto investor. And he said, no, the government doesn't have any, the government did not invest any capital, whether in the form of borrowed funds or whether in the form of equity. Again, misinterpretation of basic. The guy takes simple issues, simple matters. For the gentleman who said he's confused, let me simplify. And I'm glad that he said he's confused, because that is exactly what this guy does. I am trying to simplify his confusion. These are inconsequential issues that he come up with these ridiculous interpretation. And when he says it, people believe, people take it as gospel, as though he's the sole authority on these matters, but it's absolute nonsense. And let's take it one at a time. So if essentially we've looked at three things. I've already dealt with the first thing that he said with the natural resource fund being overstated. I'll come and summarize again. Let's talk about ceding legislative sovereignty. Ceding legislative sovereignty, he's saying that the stability clause in the petroleum agreement provides or allows Exxon to control legislative sovereignty, because it says the government can't go and change any law or pass any law in parliament that would affect the fiscal terms. But that is enshrined in the agreement. When you got to understand, one has to understand and appreciate, these are multinational companies. And when you're in an agreement, an investment agreement with a multinational company, you are not only subject to your jurisdictional laws, you are subject now to international laws, international investment laws. And I have repeatedly said on many occasions, we don't have to go far. This happened in Venezuela with Exxon under Hugo Chavez. He did exactly the same thing. He unilaterally went to the parliament, disregarded an original agreement, and the end result was Exxon activated international arbitration. They invoked international investment laws. They sought compensation from Venezuela to the tune of over $40 billion US. So these things have ramifications. You gotta respect the rule of law when it comes to these things. So that's the first thing we have to understand in terms of that allegation by Christopher Ram. The second thing is, he said that the government can't make any decision. That is, again, not true. The government has made many decisions. Let's go through a few. They've made decision to implement the local content legislation. That was a decision. That was a policy decision. Again, evidence disproving Christopher Ram's allegation. Local content legislation was a decision by the government. Monetization of the natural gas, the gas to energy project, was a decision. The decision to impose, enhance, and improve terms and conditions to the environmental permits, though additional penalties. The decision to auction new oil blocks, the decision to develop a revised petroleum agreement with new fiscal terms and conditions aimed at significantly increasing the government's stake, which shall be applied when this existing prospecting license pursuant to the 2016 agreement expires, all things being equal, by 2027 for the Stabroek block. I didn't mention, by the way, that there's this big thing about this 20% relinquishment, but I've done the math. I've looked at the numbers based on the discovered resources, based on the development projects in the pipeline and those currently. Less than 2% of the Stabroek block have been explored. So that means in 2027, when the exploration license expires, it means the government would repossess at least about 95% of the Stabroek block, because it's 26,806 square kilometers. So less than 2% of that have been explored and being developed based on the total discoveries. So the new petroleum agreement, the new petroleum law, all these are decisions by the government. So these are the evidence in the face of Christopher Ram when he says we have ceded legislative sovereignty to Exxon. Total nonsense, absolute nonsense. Okay. So I have 2 minutes remaining, so I'll stop there for tonight. So let's summarize tonight's. We talk about the impact of cost of living measures. We talk about the Natural Resource Fund. We examine Christopher Ram, 2 main allegations by him. What did we say? The sum total impact or effect of all of the cost of living measures implemented by the government through budgets 2020, 2021, 22, 23 amounted to annually nearly $190 billion. $190 billion. That's about 6% of GDP, about 24% of the national budget, and about 60% of the Natural Resource Fund balance as at 2022. Effectively, it translates to, albeit indirectly, $1.4 million per annum. And we went through all item by item, the waiver, the reduction of excise tax, subsidizing electricity costs, water, etc., etc. We went through that. It equates to $1.4 million per household annually. The allegation by Christopher Ram that the Natural Resource Fund is inflated, that is inaccurate. The Natural Resource Fund is not inflated. It is not overstated. It is established in accordance with 2 principal acts. It is managed and governed in accordance with 2 principal pieces of legislation: the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, the Natural Resources Fund Act. Pursuant to the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, the Natural Resources Fund is essentially an extra budgetary fund. In respect to the allegation by Christopher Ram that the petroleum agreement effectively allow the government to cede legislative sovereignty to ExxonMobil, total nonsense again. We have to abide by our local laws. We are also subject to international laws, international investment laws. These things have ramifications. They have consequences. We have to respect that framework. And these are simple issues. These are simple issues. I don't understand how these big men complicate simple things, whether deliberately or not, aim to motivate it by some other agenda. I don't know. But my objective in doing this for you is to demonstrate to you what are the facts and to present these alternative perspectives to inform your own views and perspectives in terms of what is happening in our country. So thank you for listening tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. Good night. Once again, stay safe.